Hello fellow 3D enthusiast. Today I'd like to share with you how I turned this into this. And there's going to be lots of time lapses, but don't let that trick you into thinking this is going to be a lazy tutorial. This is a blood, sweat, and tears tutorial. And if you don't think this result is worth it, you might be right, but maybe you'll learn some things. But before we go on, real quick, I'd like to mention that I've created a completely free hydraulic kit bash element pack for you. So these work best with Blender, and there's a link for them in the description. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to break down exactly what you're going to learn today. The biggest and most powerful concept is making a digital double, which you can use to take hard hits and exaggerate movement. And you might want to use one of these if you don't want to kill your actor, and if you don't have stuntmen, or if you want to fly or something like that. These are just a few examples of times I've used digital doubles. It's not always perfect, but once you add on some motion blur, it doesn't look too bad. So you're going to need 3 different videos to start with. The first one can just be a few T-poses, so you'll have textures for your digital double. The second one is of you actually acting like you're getting knocked over. And then the third one will be a close-up reaction shot, just to sell the effect. For the main shot, I recommend using a tripod because it's a pain in the butt to get a clean plate with camera motion. But hey, once you got all that footage and wet shoes from recording in the dew, let's hop into Blender and extract a few still frames. Let's do the clean plate and a front T-pose and a back T-pose. Look at that face. Let's delete the default cube. Now I'm going to drop in a few empties, and these are going to be image empties, so I can use them as a background image. I'm going to use my front and back T-poses just for reference, so I can see how I need to model my double. Now I'm going to ask for forgiveness from the default cube. I'm going to hit M and move these to a new collection so that I can turn them on and off at will. And I'm going to go ahead and start modeling. Pro tip, if you use the mirror modifier, you only have to model half as much. Now this part can be a little bit involved, but just pretend you're making a model for a really old 90s game, and you shouldn't go wrong. The realism really happens when we add in the texture that's got all the lighting and the folds in the cloth and everything like that. For my hair, I'm just going to add in a really low poly UV sphere, and if you think it's poofy right now, you should see it when it's not right after I took a shower. The legs, like everything else, is pretty simple. I'm just adding in a circle, and it's only got 8 vertices. I'm just going to extrude that down along my leg, and add in some huge calves. So that's the model done and dusted. Let's go on to projecting textures. I'm going to start out by hopping into the UV editing tab. I'm going to switch the render engine to cycles because Eevee makes me feel more uncomfortable than sleeping on a concrete freeway divider. After I do that, it's a simple matter of adding in an emission shader with a texture. Then I'm going to apply the mirror modifier because it turns out I want to control twice as much as half of the UVs. And now the name of the game is just matching the UVs up with the image. To project the UVs nicely, you can go U and then project from view. You can see our early 90s character is turning out quite well. If you hit Ctrl 2, that'll add in a subsurface modifier and that'll smooth things out pretty nicely. Aha, now you see, if I didn't know any better, I would confuse this for the real me. Just gonna continue for a bit matching up appendages. Now this face right here is the stuff of nightmares. Let's work on it a little bit to see if we can get it any better. To fix this he who must not be named situation back here, I'm going to select the faces with the face on it, and then I'm going to add a new material that's got our other texture on it that we got of the back pose. And that looks so good, I'm just going to get a few more faces. I feel like having two separate legs is probably going to be a problem down the road, so I'm just going to connect them really quick here. So now you've got a textured model of your actor. Let's rig it a little bit here. Now everybody says the rigging is the hardest thing ever and they're all scared of it, but I don't think it's really that bad as long as you can actually select the rig. To see where my loop cuts are, I'm just disabling the subsurface modifier temporarily, and that tends to make things a lot more visible. When I've got one leg done, I'm just going to use period to set the pivot point to the 3D cursor and then scale that by -1 on the x-axis. Oh, you might want to duplicate it too. I'm going to do that same thing with the arms, and now I've got 2 arms and 2 legs, which incidentally adds up to a full skeletal system. Now if I select the mesh and somehow manage to select the armature, I'm going to hit Ctrl P, and then I'm going to use automatic weights. Don't forget to use period to reset your pivot point to be median point. Well, that seems to work pretty well. I'm going to use Ctrl-Z to undo all my hard work of pressing 2 buttons, and I'm going to add in some extra loop cuts just so it deforms better. Now let's try that again. Cool. I'm not a huge fan of the way the waist is deforming, but I tried, and I literally don't know how to weight paint in 2.8, so I'd say it's good enough. Oh yeah, in edit mode it's a good idea to parent the legs to the waist. You can use Ctrl-P to do that. Use the Keep Offset option.
Why? 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 Why?
Okay, so using the compositor, it's pretty important that eventually we get it so that the live action guy disappears. And we do that by making what's called a clean plate. A good start to get that working is to get a frame grab of when the live action figure isn't there, and when it comes time to do the switch, which we'll mark out here in a second, we can just slide a value and it will change the video to the image that we have with nobody there. If that sounds a little complicated, you'll get the idea in a second here. On the timeline, I'm just making sure the frame is set to a place where I want to set a marker and hitting M, and that'll set a marker. Hey, look at that, our slider is working. It doesn't look very good because the image is not moving. So in a second here, I'm just going to make a small mask that's pretty quick and dirty, and that'll just have the image over it. And if you don't really understand what I'm doing at this point, well, I don't really either, so yeah. Tell you what, let's go to the Layout tab and switch that to a movie clip editor. I'm going to select my footage and track my face so that our mask will have something to parent to eventually. So here I'm switching to the masking workspace, and I'm just hitting Control and left click, and that'll set in a mask node. Then to close up the mask, I hit Alt-C. Then I'm going to hit A to make sure all of the mask is selected, and then select the tracker and Control-P to parent it. I'm going to make sure auto keyframes are enabled and just move it around to fit as the time goes on. And in 2.8, I guess the feather feature isn't really working right now, so that stinks, but I guess I'll just blur it in the compositor. For some reason, this actor was dead set on flailing his arms around like one of those guys you find at car dealerships, which really doesn't help us out in post. But this is about as easy as it gets when it comes to rotoscoping, so let's be thankful for that at least. Cool, so when we go into compositing, I'm just going to add in a mask node and make sure that it's actually set to the mask that we just created. And I'm pretty much just telling Blender to paste the still image that we have over that little area of mask, which goes over top of our video. It's a good idea to drop in a blur node over the mask just so that we don't get any hard edges. And we're almost set with the clean plate here, but let's just make it a tiny bit better by adding in an RGB curves node. I can see that the image we're pasting over is just a little bit brighter than the footage, so I'm just going to make a little dip in the curve. And now with this mix node here, we can just use this slider to fade in and out of our live action actor. Just drop in some keyframes there and we're all set. Alright, so I'm going to hop back into the Layout tab and I'm going to start getting ready to animate. I'm going to do that by adding in a background image in the camera and then just positioning the camera roughly how it looks like it could be positioned in the real world. A tip I found helpful for adding in cameras like this is if you add in a ground plane, you can kind of match that up with the ground. Oh, and also if you make that plane a shadow catcher, then you've got automatic shadows for rendering the digital double, which is pretty nice. Back in compositing for a second, I'm going to add in a mix node with our render layers plugged into there, and I'm going to check the little checkerboard box that's next to where it says mix, and that'll make it an alpha over. My camera had a keyframe set, so it reset the position, and now we have to reset it back to the other position that we had just soul-crushingly worked on, so that's pretty cool that we get some more practice in. At this point, I'm going to spend a lot of time on matching up every single frame in the transition period, where it blends from the real figure to the digital figure. And it's not too bad if you've got automatic keyframes enabled and you've got some nice music playing. It can really help if you've got the movie clip editor enabled next to you so you can see without any overlays what the actual footage is doing. Alright, so if you've made it this far, I'm very impressed. But this is the fun part, where either it can look really good or you can mess it up. To make it look really good, it helps to be a really good animator, which I'm not. So yeah, let's add in some effects later, and that'll maybe help it look better. This part actually is pretty important, so I'll ease up on the time lapse and only do it in half speed. Pretty much what we want to happen is to fade in the digital double at the same time as we're fading out the actual live action guy. And if you're not sure, you can do that by setting keyframes by holding your mouse over the field that you want to keyframe and hitting I. That'll put in a keyframe. Another good idea is to have the background of the render as transparent, which you can do by going to the render tab and then hitting the film dropdown and checking the transparent box. And now, except for the crappy animation, we're pretty much ready to render out. So for your computer's sake, you can set the frames to start right at the start of the morphing effect. Also in the render tab, if you hit up the color management drop-down, you can switch it from filmic to standard, and that way it won't ruin your life when you try to edit it back together.
Wow.
Now this is totally optional, but you could render out a hypothetical boxing glove that'll hit you in the face and make just that much more sense out of the situation. And heck, why stop there? Why don't you waste more of your precious time on this failing project by rendering out a massive smoke simulation that'll make it look even worse? Alright, this dumpster fire of a tutorial is getting a little long in the tooth, so I'm gonna leave you with one last pot of gold here. When you're simulating smoke, if you have your digital double on a different collection, you can right-click on that collection, go to View Layer, and then hit Set Holdout. That'll make that collection a mask so that you can't see the smoke there. Well, my fellow 3D enthusiast, I feel kinda bad about this tutorial because I don't feel like it added a whole lot of value in Blender knowledge. I worked super hard to make it a little bit more entertaining to make up for that, but let me know in the comments if you enjoyed it or didn't enjoy it, and I'll try and do better next time. Cheers!